Center.
Etobicoke Center.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to speak in the House today in support of Bill 72, the Supply Act for the 2014 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, in this legislature, and I mentioned this yesterday, but I want to reiterate it today, in this legislature we debate a range of important issues that all of us believe will improve the quality of life of Ontarians and people in our communities. This is one of those issues. The Supply Act is one of those things that is important because it will ensure that we can continue to invest to support a better quality of life for all Ontarians. I'd like to share with you what I mean. As the Deputy Government House Leader noted, the Supply Act provides the necessary legal and spending authority that ensures we can pay for important priorities like schools, hospitals, transit, and so I urge all members of the Legislature to approve this bill. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a few moments to reflect on the achievements of the past year. I think those are important to talk about. And that the Supply Act will allow us to continue to support. As you know, Mr. Speaker, our government, under the leadership of Premier Yvan, was given a strong 4-year mandate by the people of Ontario. And we were elected in great part because we made a commitment to take a balanced and thoughtful approach to government. We have a bold plan to build Ontario by focusing on a number of priorities, and these include investing in people's talents and skills, building modern infrastructure and transit networks, creating a dynamic and supportive business environment on a foundation of fiscal responsibility, Mr. Speaker. And we're deeply committed to both protect and improve the services that matter to people and also to be fiscally responsible. That's the balanced approach that the people of my riding in the Etobicoke Centre asked me to pursue, and in my colleagues' ridings on this side of the House, and I'm sure on the opposite side as well. But we're also going to make sure, we're not only going to make sure we're taking a balanced approach, but we're going to make sure that we make sure every dollar counts. Because that's another thing that I heard in my community is when you go to Queen's Park, please make sure that you make every dollar count, that you get value for taxpayer money. And there's no question that the folks on this side of the legislature, Mr. Speaker, and I work closely with Minister Matthews of Treasury Board, is working very hard to make sure that happens. But I know that that's the case for all ministers in our government. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have a goal to eliminate the deficit by 2017-18, and I can tell you that we're well on our way to accomplish that goal. Member opposite will be glad to hear that. As the Finance Minister clearly laid out in the fall economic statement, the government is focusing on 4 strategies to get us back to a balanced budget. And I'd like to reiterate those because I think these are important pillars of how we're doing that. The first is we're going to ensure that everyone pays their fair share of taxes. Okay? This means tackling the underground economy, corporate tax avoidance, and contraband tobacco. Mr. Speaker, this is just a matter of fairness. This is just making sure that the taxes that are on the books today, that everyone pays their fair share. That's the first thing. The second point is we're going to work to maximize the value of government assets and use the funds to build the new generation of public infrastructure. So we're not just talking about investments for today, Mr. Speaker, but we're talking about the investments that are needed for tomorrow to build up our economy and to improve our quality of life. And as someone who's worked in business in my prior life, I can say that this practice of looking at assets, looking at the infrastructure.
I do appreciate quietness to give the member the opportunity to debate. So I would encourage members on both sides not to have conversations across the legislative floor while in fact we do have a member engaging in debate. Please continue.
Thank you, Speaker. I appreciate that. Let me just go back. So there were 4 points. The Finance Minister laid out 4 points in the fall economic statement that will lead us to a balanced budget. The first is we're going to ensure everyone pays their fair share of taxes. That's an issue of fairness, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, we're going to maximize the value of government assets that the people of Ontario, through governments of the past, the governments of the present, have invested in. And as I was saying, as someone with a finance background, a business background, that is just good practice. That's a good way of making sure that we're getting good value for taxpayer money, Mr. Speaker, and delivering the best possible outcomes, not just in the present, but also into the future. The third point, Mr. Speaker, is we're going to work to restrain compensation growth in the public sector. And the fourth is something that I'm very excited about, which is the program review, renewal, and transformation. And I know there are a number of members of Treasury Board here who've been involved in that. I know all the ministries have been involved in that. Everyone's working hard on this. And it's a fundamentally new and important approach to multi-year planning and budgeting. And what it involves is taking a line-by-line approach to look through every ministry's budget, to look at the programs and services that it delivers, Mr. Speaker. And the program review will manage spending by using, first of all, by using fresh eyes to take stock of every government program and service in order to determine, is it still relevant? Is it effective? Is it efficient? And is it sustainable? And Mr. Speaker, the review is about finding new and smarter ways of doing things to improve outcomes and deliver for the people of Ontario the best value for their taxpayers' dollars. And the member for Nipissing was speaking earlier about job losses in his community, and I am very sympathetic to those folks who have lost their jobs. But I can just tell you, Mr. Speaker, that he ran on a platform to cut 100,000 jobs, and that's not the approach we're taking, Mr. Speaker. We're going to move forward with more opportunities that improve efficiency, reduce overlap across government programs, and ensure the government works better for Ontarians. We will make tough choices about programs and services that are not performing, do not link to government priorities, or no longer serve a clear public interest. At the same time, we'll ensure we create jobs, expand opportunity, and invest in priorities like health, education, and infrastructure. And I think these are all the right places to be investing our taxpayers' dollars. And then we're going to look at across ministries, Mr. Speaker. We're going to look to see if we can achieve better outcomes, better value for money. If we pooled resources or simplified access. Getting back to balance is not an end in itself. I want to emphasize that. Getting back to balance is not an end in itself, but it's a means to an end. The real goal is that the programs and services that Ontarians rely on will be there when we need them and when the people of Ontario need them. And I'd just like to give an example of what I'm talking about. An example of the transformation that's already underway is our 5-year poverty reduction strategy, realizing our potential, especially as it relates to homelessness. At one time, Mr. Speaker, Ontario had 2 separate ministries and 5 different program areas addressing homelessness. They were rigid rules and complex administration. We created one program, the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative, one program administered by one ministry. This helped us put money where it is really needed, increasing funding by $42 million. Increasing funding. Let me repeat that just so it's clear. Increasing funding by $42 million to a total of $294 million, Mr. Speaker. And other strategic investments geared to reducing poverty across government have also occurred, including health, education, and housing programs. Now, Mr. Speaker, since launching our first poverty reduction strategy in 2008, 47,000 children and their families were lifted out of poverty, and many others were prevented from falling into poverty in the last 6 years. And I'd ask the members opposite to listen to what I have to say because these are relevant figures. To help low-wage workers, the government has again raised the minimum wage to the highest of any province, $11 per hour, and has indexed increases for the future. This year alone, we are investing more than $1 billion in the Ontario Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker, something that's benefiting children across Ontario and benefiting children in my community. We'll allocate $60 million over 3 years to create about 1,000 new supportive housing spaces and related supports to help Ontarians living with mental health issues and addictions, Mr. Speaker. And we'll provide health benefits for children and youth in low-income families to ensure they have access to services not covered by publicly funded health care, such as prescription drugs, vision care, and mental health services, and there is much, much more. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to emphasize that while we've been making these investments in our priorities, we've also managed to hold average growth in program spending to 1.2%, which is well below inflation without cutting services that people of Ontario rely on. And going forward, program spending is projected to grow at an annual rate of 0.8% through 2017-18. Mr. Speaker, we are investing in the services that the people of my community, and I know the people of all our communities, are concerned about. We're investing in healthcare, education, and infrastructure. These are not all the wrong places, these are all the right places. We are taking a fiscally responsible approach to managing, to balancing the budget and to managing taxpayers' dollars. And we're delivering on our promise to Ontarians. We're protecting and improving the services that matter, and we're being fiscally responsible and making every dollar count. And I'm proud to be part of a government that's working very, very hard to do all those things. I started by, Mr. Speaker, by saying that we're all here to improve the quality of life of people and communities across our province. And I'd like to reiterate an important point, that the introduction of the Supply Act is part of the government's economic plan to build Ontario up, to create jobs, and to secure our shared prosperity. And therefore, the Supply Act is a fundamental step in doing just that. The government's plan, as I've outlined, is comprehensive and focuses on Ontario's greatest strengths, our people, and on partnerships. I urge all members of the Legislature to support this Act. Without the spending authority that the Supply Act would provide, Mr. Speaker, the government would be unable to meet its obligations to the people of this province and continue the important work before us, for the benefit of the constituents of my community in Etobicoke Centre and for the benefit of the people of Ontario. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.